From the city that friendliness built, Lebanon, Oregon, welcome to Pivot. My name is Michael Carragon, and I am your host. On this podcast, you're going to hear from everyday heroes in our community that have genuine hearts to encourage others by sharing their uncurated stories of redemption and how they have leveraged victories and hardships to impact others. If you crave raw, authentic stories of resiliency, personal transformation, and the strength of community, Pivot is for you. From the city that friendliness built, Lebanon, Oregon, welcome to Pivot. We are so stoked you're here. We have an awesome episode today where we're going to talk about what Pivot is about. My name is Michael, and I am going to introduce you to my co-host, highly sought after co-host, by the way, in podcast land, Mr. Rafay.
Michael,
welcome.
It is a pleasure being here. And I don't know about sought after. Maybe that's a little bit of a stretch, but I am definitely excited and happy to be here and, doing this thing with you. It's super awesome.
Well, it's an honor for us. And again, I'm glad we got past the agents and being able to get it down, all the litigation that goes along with getting up. But I am so excited to have this man sitting next to me. I've benefited as a friend. And also, I learned from this man continuously and even gotten to meet his family. So he's going to share a little bit about his story, what makes him tick, what he's passionate about, and how he wound up from the promised land of San Diego to our wonderful community, yet rainy community here in Lebanon, Oregon. So tell us a little bit about yourself. But before that, we always ask the question here to start the podcast. So let me say... tell us the most embarrassing thing about... No, just kidding. I had to ask that because I like your laugh, okay?
Oh, man, you're going to have a whole list of those probably.
Kidding about that one.
No, you're good. You're good. And now, so who am I? It's interesting because when you talk to other people and you get their stories out, it's so easy and it's so organic. But when it comes to, turning the lens back on yourself, it's a different ballgame altogether.
Right.
But if I had to start with who I am, I guess my identity, what defines me is I would start by saying I'm a Pakistani American. I am someone who holds that very near to me because it starts with my grandfather. Now, my grandfather, he was born and raised in Pakistan, and he had 4 kids, 2 daughters, 2 sons. But the defining thing about him as a role model for myself is how he went through so much of life and how he was kicked down so many times, but he managed to maintain this integrity and this humble air around him that he passed down to his children, and who in turn, taught me and forged who I am today and continuing to become. And I think, looking at those origin stories is just so important, because even what we do and when we talk to guests, it's about where they're coming from.
Absolutely.
Because where they're coming from often defines who they are and who they will become. So for me, coming back to it, my grandfather was, this amazing guy, and his family were very wealthy until his father passed away, and they lost everything pretty much overnight. So he was basically forced to sell stationery on the streets of Pakistan to support his mom, who is now a widow, and his multiple siblings. I believe, again, how many did he have? I believe he had 9 siblings in total. And, raising up from that, he would sell stationery in the mornings and then study at night and tutor his siblings. And he worked his way up. He managed to secure, a scholarship to study at Johns Hopkins, where he got his degree in demographics. And he came back to Pakistan and ended up working for the government and had some time that he spent at the United Nations. But really, he gave back in a big, big way. And when it came to advocating for his own daughters, he said, my daughters will get an education, because he saw what his mom had to go through when, his father passed away. So he was very progressive in that, right? But he used his life experiences to kind of push forward and, really pave the way for my aunts and uncles and my mom to become who they are today. And those values that he instilled, I guess what I'm leading up to is who I am today, because the way they raised me and the way they kind of taught me is something that I'm extremely proud of, because it wasn't easy necessarily, because, it was, there's a level of strictness where, you need to do the dishes and this and that, but it went even beyond that, because it's like, when you're in a situation, what is the right thing? you know, and really doing the right thing when especially no one is looking is something that they really pass down to me, and that care and compassion for other people is something that they truly instilled in me. So I guess that in a lot of ways is why I also am pursuing the field of medicine, because at one point you're caring for people, but then you're also getting to understand them better, and you're getting to understand them moreover at a very intimate time in their own lives, where they're coming to you with some degree of ailment, and it's not a comfortable time, and they're very vulnerable, and they're opening up to you in that regard. But for me, it's that kind of foundation that I had from them, which allowed me to get to where I am today. And of course, in between, there were situations where, the applications to medical school, COVID coming in, all sorts of situations you deal with, how you get through those, and how you basically frame the test that's been given to you, how you take those stressors and you reframe them as actual growth points and opportunities for you to grow, is again something that comes back to my upbringing. So I guess I'm emphasizing this over and over again, but really what it comes down to is I am who I am in terms of, you know, a student doctor, in terms of a conversationalist, in terms of a friend, really, based off of the way that my family has brought me up, and I owe it to them. So, and that's, a big thing where our successes, when you really look at them, they're not our own. They're of the
True.
people who've backed us up every step of the way. When you really look at it and you pull everyone's contribution out, you realize that you're just kind of a sum of your parts, which is everyone else around you. So, staying humble and continuing to acknowledge the fact that I'm so blessed, especially, coming up here to Lebanon, Oregon, like you mentioned, from San Diego, I didn't know what to expect. But in the short time that I've been here, what I've come to realize is that, it's an amazing community, and it's giving me the growth that I need at the next level, where I can continue to push my boundaries, and I can continue to pursue projects such as the one that we're doing, where, you get to learn not only about others, but more about yourself, who you are as a person, as a conversationalist, as, someone who interviews in multiple levels, I would say.
Wow, so much that I'm trying to figure out where to start with. But as I listen to you and having the inside track of knowing you personally and the gift you are to a friend, the integrity man that you are, I think of legacy, that you spoke about your grandparents, your parents, your family, the community at large that has influenced you greatly. And as you and I have had many conversations on our hope, one of the hopes for this podcast itself is to be able to share the stories, being able to be in a place to listen to those stories, but also to be able to empower others with that too. So you've been through a lot. You've moved to a place which I'm sure there was a lot of culture shock setting in to come here to Lebanon, which we love it here, but it's very different. No shock there to San Diego. Like, what are some of the current struggles that you're facing right now in terms of being in a new place? You mentioned you're in medical school, and being away from this tight knit community, your family. Like, what are some of the things that you're facing with that?
It's a good question. And I feel like there's a lot of ways to answer it, in the sense that, depending on how you look at it, you're either really far away from your family or you're really close to your family. And what I mean by that is, when it comes to settling into a community like this, I've always been someone, and I've been very fortunate, where my parents took me on their many travels, and seeing a bunch of communities around the world helped me kind of acclimate to them and
Yeah.
be comfortable being uncomfortable, moving around and not getting too honed in and stuck in one way of doing
So is it
things.
fair to say stretching and being outside your comfort zone and with those experiences?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, even here for me, it's not, surprisingly, it's not much of a shock being up here. For me, it's kind of an opportunity to grow and explore, especially when, coming off of COVID, you've been in the same area
Right.
and for so many years. This is kind of a fresh beginning and a fresh start. And I think really what it comes down to for me is it's what you make of it. You can be in a community, in any community, just like you can go to any school, no matter what the name is, but it's what you do there which defines how things will go. So when I came here, for me, of course, it was a little bit of a settling in period, but there's so many people who I've never met in my life.
Right.
And each of those people have stories. And, I'm not going to lie. Of course, when you come up here, you're like, oh man, where have I landed? Lebanon, Oregon, where compared to San Diego, where is this? But I can't emphasize this enough. When you start talking to the people and when you start hearing their stories, and then you start thinking of your own story and you start connecting the dots, you realize that there's a depth and a richness to this community which you can't find everywhere. So I think that's one of the things that's really kind of reeled me into the community that is Lebanon, Oregon, is meeting all these people and interacting with them and getting to know who they are. But to your original question, which is, how do you handle this with medical school and everything else? I mean, of course, medical school is a beast and unto itself.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, you're just kind of working away and chipping away, and a lot of people are like, "Oh man, that must be a drag." But when you're in it with a community of such gifted and driven individuals such as are in my class, and I will say that and again and again and again, where I'm lucky to have probably one of the best classes a medical student could ever ask for or dream of. You are in it together, and you kind of lose track of the fact that you're working so long and hard because you're in it together. But it also again makes you realize that when you have those moments of quote unquote free time, how you spend them is just so much more precious. So pouring them into conversations with others is something that's really kept me going. And in terms of staying in touch with my family, I talk with them every day. So it
So
to me
important.
doesn't feel like there's much of a distance because of all the fulfillment that I'm getting over here from other people and growing myself, and then kind of talking to my family and staying in touch with them. I would say genuinely, truly, it hasn't been kind of this gap that's been developing in me or this pit.
Well, that's pretty remarkable considering it's only been 6 months since you've been here. I mean, we
That's
feel
right.
like we know you. My agent Rebecca and I feel like we know you for the longest time because just that instantaneous. But also, just maybe you could speak more specifically, if you feel comfortable, about uh, something during your medical school time here, the first year, that a time of adversity that you experienced, or maybe one of your peers in your cohort, and how that worked out or didn't work out.
I think it's interesting because medical students, we tend to be these type A personalities who are just so driven. And when if I was to lay out the resumes of my fellow classmates, it would just go on and on and on, accomplishment after
Pretty
accomplishment.
smart people around there, huh?
Yeah, there's some smart cookies in my class, and
Who don't need sleep apparently, huh?
yeah, it's one of those things that just kind of withers away, and you make do without it. But one thing is that I remember so clearly during orientation is everyone is trying to understand who everyone else is, right? I'm not going to say sizing each other up, but in a sense, you're trying to get an idea of who everyone is because this is going to be a pretty tough endeavor you're heading into. Everyone has told you it's going to be difficult.
And it's highly competitive.
It's highly competitive. And again, people are coming with masters and multiple programs and everything. But I remember when we were thrown into it, into the thick of it, we had our first 3 blocks, which compose our first semester, where we're first going through the basic sciences. You learn all of what you learned in undergraduate within the period of a month. And I think that was something very humbling for us all because at first we were just kind of like trying to understand where we all stand together. But then after that first few exams, it leveled the playing field.
Reality hit.
Reality hit. It didn't matter where you were from or how much education you had or what you did in undergrad. it was a very stark kind of reminder that the playing field is now level. And if you want to get through it, you got to stick together. So, you know, being and having those support systems in medical school was so important, because when we all realized we were in this together, we truly started working together and we had each other's backs. And I mean, the examples I can give of that, where I remember I was sick with COVID and my classmates came together. They brought me, care packages. And the classes I had missed, they took out their own time from studying and helped me catch up. And, similarly, if you have to, remake an assignment or do anything like that, these people have your back. Because again, you don't know who someone is until you're truly in a point until you're in a tight spot, right? It's then when people truly show their character. And I think what was really cool for me to see is during all of these moments when, you feel down and out, there's someone there to have your back. And then when someone does that, it perpetuates that notion in yourself that I need to be there for that person. Because truly, at the end of the day, we're going to become physicians. We're prospective physicians. And if we can't take care of each other and have each other's back, how are we going to have our patients back, is the way I see it.
I just being sort of a front row witness to watching this instance play out, this hardship play out. I was reminded by you that it's not only if you get sick that you're feeling sick and you just have to catch up this block here. Time doesn't stop in medical school. You have your next block to focus on. So during that time, was there any kind of encouragement, like a verbal encouragement or something that really kind of propelled you towards that resiliency, being able to press on despite not feeling well, despite the overwhelming pressures of having to finish this block to be able to advance and survive, and then to be able to comprehend, drink from a fire hose and the new information that you're receiving?
So for this, actually, one thing that occurred to me during this time was in my travels back to Pakistan. I remember one of the activities that I was fortunate enough to partake in was helping teach street schools. And when I was in my undergraduate at UC Riverside, I was an academic resource center supplemental instructor, which we basically, taught students, taught classes, and I really kind of honed that skill in. And when I went to Pakistan and I taught these kids, these are kids who had nothing. They would work all day and they would come back off their. No one is telling them to be at school. They would come because of their own interest and motivation, and these 8-year-olds would come there to seek education because they knew what it meant for them later on down the line. I mean, these kids had the maturity of 25, 30-year-olds who I talked to today, and because of their life circumstances, they pulled themselves up and they kept on going. So I thought to myself, when I'm feeling down and out, like I mentioned before with my grandfather and the circumstances he was put in, these kids who I had been so fortunate to meet and teach, the circumstances that they had. And I'm sitting here with, food at my fingertips, with heating, an air-conditioned apartment. As my dad said when they were helping me move in, he's like, "Wow, they really got Club Med set up for you up here."
Perspective, right?
Perspective is huge.
Yes.
And again, gaining that perspective through my life, I thought to myself, yeah, it's tough, but there are people who have it way tougher. It's about perspective and reminding yourself. So when I felt down and out, really, I was like, Rafay, what does it come down to? You just have to take one step after another and you keep on going. It doesn't matter. There are people who are in much harder situations than you are, which you have seen and you experienced firsthand. And imagine if they had a shot at the same opportunity of becoming a physician in the United States, what would they give for that? And you're here pursuing that. Of course, you're going to get knocked down. I would actually argue that looking back on it and being knocked down after some tests is really important because it gives you that perspective and that thirst, and it reforges you. So rather than looking at them as these adverse things you can't come back from, you need to look at them as necessary points where you rebuild yourself. Because oftentimes what I saw after coming out of these, so I needed the perspective to get me through, But now that I look back at it, I believe that having been through those experiences of where you really get knocked down and you're really being pushed, those are the times where you are pushed and you develop yourself into something more. Just like if you're forging a blade, right? You're a chef, you know the importance of a good knife in the kitchen. Well, a good knife is often heat treated multiple times over to make it stronger, and I would say that this process is no different.
Sort of the refiner's fire here.
Exactly. And it's not fun,
Yeah.
being put in a 1,000-degree oven,
Yeah.
but in order to get you malleable, to beat into a new mold, it's such a necessary process. So thinking of those two things in tandem, perspective on the one hand of my life experiences, and then the benefit that I'm gaining from this, even though it's not easy to see it in the moment, is just such an important thing. And I know that, again, every action we take, every decision we make starts and ends with our patients. So if I want to be the best practitioner that I can be, I need to think of my patients, and they're the thing, they're the entity that's kind of driving me forward in all this as well.
So, again, just in the medical community, has there been any instances where these things that you're sharing and the shaping that you've been through under a lot of duress, under just hardships, and being able to show resiliency through that, has that served as an encouragement to others in your cohort, or?
Of course, and I would say the other way around. I mean, I see the resiliency that a lot of my classmates have shown, and it's driven me forward. We have students from Maui, and
Yes.
their homes were going, and were in risk of being affected by
The
the fire.
first week they were here.
And can you imagine that? Not only are they hundreds and hundreds of miles away
Yes.
from home, but just this feeling of helplessness and seeing people go through that, seeing people go through just these reality checks where relationships have fallen apart. And again, they have medical school to deal with. There are so many people, and I think that's the important thing to understand in medical school. If you think you're the only one going through something, you're not. I think what it comes down to is maintaining this perspective that everyone is going through something, and to truly connect with others on that level and know that you're not alone and they're not alone is something that's so important.
Yeah. I mean, there's numerous stories that I've heard personally being up front that um, I know in later podcasts we'll be able to kind of share. Again, we so appreciate that you're willing to journey with us on this initial campaign of Pivot. And just two last questions, if that's all right, I want to ask you. Um, well, first of all, if you want to tell our audience about kind of what your hopes are, even with serving on this podcast for the first season or so, like what do you hope to get out of that, or to have an outworking of it?
I think one of the most important things is learning not only how to tell stories, which I had a professor in college, his name was David Biggs, world history professor, excellent guy, but he really kind of taught me the importance and value of storytelling, but also becoming a better listener. And I think one of the biggest things that I want to get out of this is, how do you really hone in on someone and put yourself in their shoes and then ask those questions to dig deeper into who they are and really get that information and instill it into your own story. So that's one thing that I'm honored to kind of be a part of on this podcast. And the second thing you asked, I believe, was what plans that I have.
Well, what do you say, what do you hope as a result of this podcast and being on this podcast? Because you're a busy guy. I mean, these hours are golden.
Of
we
course.
realize. And
But again, like I said, honing this ability of listening is just so important, even as a prospective physician, because when a patient comes in, so many of the physicians who I look up to have said that, in order to be a good specialist or anything, put that aside, you need to be a good listener and a good practitioner. And the way that happens is just by listening and taking a good history. Mm-hmm. So this is really no different than that. And, in that same regard, one thing that I hope to do with the experience I gain from here is connect our third and fourth year students who go off on clinical rotations to us first and second years, because I think it's just so unfortunate that, they kind of go off into the ether.
so just to clarify, the first and second year students are here. and then after the second year, they
Exactly. So during the first and second year, you're kind of doing your book work and you're doing these mock patient encounters. But in the third and fourth year, you're in a hospital setting with real patients doing real oral presentations. So having that experience, having those individuals who kind of go out there and then disappear, to me is just something that bothers me because they have so much experience they're gaining, so much they're learning. And those initial moments when you're thrown into the deep end of the pool and you have those thoughts, those are, watershed moments that I want to kind of use the platform of a podcast to bring them back, connect them, and dispense advice and their thoughts and their feelings to first and second year students so that we can better prepare ourselves moving into this and having an idea of what we're coming into contact with to also, again, hone your readiness and become a better practitioner down the line. So again, communication, tying in those loops in, listening, these are just some of the few things that, in the time that I have, I can say to really, that I'm really hoping to get out of this podcast.
and so how do you plan to take that into your with the medical community? Like
With
what practical ways?
with the medical community, the biggest thing is I feel like, we're good at, treating patients, but having this kind of platform where we can kind of introspectively reflect on the things around us in healthcare, the things that are going to be in healthcare, future trends. I feel like there isn't enough of that going on, of physicians really getting together and being still and talking and reflecting about, where things are going, what they feel, and, how they feel about it. It's no secret that some of the highest burnout rates exist, but I feel like if we can all develop this art of introspection and then reflection and bringing it together with each other, I think that'll do us a world of good, and it will even help unlock barriers and, you know, glass ceilings that we'd set for ourselves. So my hope is eventually to do this with fellow healthcare practitioners and allow it to be a space where we can kind of take our experiences, build upon them, not only for others to learn from and see, but for ourselves.
And in a podcast? Is
In a,
it,
in a
just to
podcast
clarify?
setting
Yeah.
is what I hope to. But
Sure.
again, I think one of the biggest things that I've learned being here in Lebanon and wherever you move is it's keeping an open mind. So the ethos of that is something that I want to preserve. And now whether it's done through a podcast or some other medium,
Mhm.
what have you, I think that will come in time. But maintaining and preserving the idea and the spirit of what I hope to do is the main thing. How it gets done, that's kind of irrelevant as long as I have good people to do it with, such as yourself.
I'll tell you what, last thing, if you could just share a little bit about, so obviously, most people aren't in the medical community, so to speak, but what would you share or encourage those who are listening that this world has had a lot of crazy things going on the last couple of years that maybe have found themselves isolated, marginalized, that don't have that sense of community? What encouragement or inspiration can you share with them about getting connected? You mentioned being a storyteller or just getting to know people, being able to be a part of such a tight knit group, maybe.
I think the biggest thing, well, so one thing, I mean, I feel like medical professionals, physicians, they do get respect and recognition for going through a lot, but I think there are other individuals and professionals and people in day to day life, have single mothers raising families out there who just don't get attention or respect or just the credit that they deserve. There's people going through life on a daily basis who just don't get the credit that they deserve, but they continue to push on and they have so much resilience. And I would say the biggest thing is if you're feeling isolated and if you're feeling out of touch, it's never too late to connect and to open the door and to reach out. But the one thing that I remind myself of is every second that goes by is one less second we have. And one thing that has kind of dawned on me is no one really cares. I mean, in a world of social media, we think we care, we think others care, and we think, we have to put on a certain mask for others to see. But in reality, when all is said and done, no one really cares.
It's kind of curated, for lack of better
It's
words.
all curated. And, when you kind of reach that realization, it becomes easier to put yourself out of your comfort zone. At least it has been for me. Because, you don't necessarily care what someone is going to say if you act a little goofy, or if you put yourself out of your comfort zone, because these things I think are very important for our growth. And, when you go about your life as if no one is watching and you're just staying true and genuine to yourself, I think we can all achieve a level of happiness that we haven't known before necessarily. But walking to the beat of your own drum is just so important. And how someone does that, and whether it, conforms to a norm or not, it doesn't matter. There's so many times where I'll just go and take myself out to dinner, and my friends will ask, "Oh, but you're not going with anyone." It's like, yeah, I am. I'm going with myself. I'm going to have a great time reflecting, people watching, observing, starting conversations with strangers. It doesn't matter.
Us external processors, it gets a little bit ugly when we start getting to conflict with ourselves, but I get it.
Indeed. But the biggest thing is, put yourself out of your comfort zone, and don't be afraid of what's going to happen, because life is frankly just too short.
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot this season. Again, we so appreciate you being willing to co-host with me this initial season of Pivot. And we're going to talk a lot about that, the art of conversation. We're going to talk about taking risks. We're going to be relational risks as we speak of. And we're hoping to really get to be those to have storytellers on here, to be able to foster that conversation in a safe and compassionate space. And we know you're the right guy for it. So we thank you for that. Thanks for being on.
Pleasure is all mine, man. I'm looking forward to a great season and seasons ahead. So
make sure you get some sleep. Thank you for tuning into Pivot. Hope it left you inspired, motivated, and reminded that redemption is always within reach, no matter how far you've spun out when life happens.